Good.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are having our second in the series of leadership skills building for PWN, getting our voices heard, understanding meetings. I'm Barb Cardell. I am the Training and Technical Assistance Director at PWN USA. I use they, them, their pronouns, and would like to welcome you all this afternoon for another great opportunity to learn a little bit more about how we can be powerful advocates as we understand the systems that we move within. Before we get started, however, I would like to ask that we have a moment of silence. We've learned of another woman living with HIV who died today. And we would like to take this moment of silence for the women, the transgender sisters, people in communities of color who die as a result of violence. It is in their memory that we do this work. And so if everybody is okay to just take a moment to think of the folks that we have lost and how powerful they have been. All right, thank you. So as I said, my name is Barb Cardell. I'm the training director with PWN. I appreciate everyone for joining us. Just to let you know, we are streaming live on Facebook. So if you would prefer to turn your video off, you can go ahead and do that. And we also will be taking questions in the chat box, but also we'll be getting questions from Facebook as we're going on. As we build our advocacy muscles, we want to make sure that this learning is available to everyone. So thank you for joining us here today, and also feel free to share this as we move forward. A couple of logistics before we get started. As we said, this meeting is being recorded. We are in meeting mode on Zoom, and so we're asking that everybody go ahead and *6 to mute yourself or just use the mute key. If you come on and forget that you're not on mute, we'll go ahead and mute you, which then means that you'll have to unmute yourself before you ask a question. We're hoping that that this will be an interactive session and that people will ask questions in the chat box. There will also be a couple of times where we will just see if people have had experiences around meetings and around meetings that felt really inclusive or meetings that felt not so inclusive. And so at that point in time, if you want to come off of mute and feel like you want to share a story or ask a question even, this is a collective learning space and we hope that you feel comfortable doing that. And then finally, we will have time as well at the end to ask questions. Presenters today are going to be Vanita Ray, PWN's co-executive director, and myself, Barb Cardell, and thank you again for joining us. As we said, our agenda today is going to be talking a little bit about PWN and who we are, talk about why holding a good meeting is so important, talk about steps for planning a good meeting, talk about how do you achieve consensus? What is modified consensus? What happens if you just straight up vote with a majority? We know that that oftentimes suppresses the voices of those who most need to be heard. So we talk about a couple of different ways that are non-traditional ways of getting consensus within the group. We talk about PWN style groups, and then we'll have our questions and answers. Our goals for today are to understand the parts of planning a productive meeting, commit to inclusive and productive meetings, especially within PWN spaces, support participation by our members, especially at our chapter level, to increase engagement and give people a chance to share your experience with great meetings and some not so great meetings, and again, for a shared learning space. I'll turn it over to Vanita to talk a little bit about PWN.
Okay. Hey, y'all. It's good to be joining y'all virtually tonight. If you don't know, PWN at Positive Women's Network, our mission is to prepare and involve women and people of trans experience living with HIV in every decision that impacts you, right? That to improve the quality of our lives. We are the only national membership organization that is being led by and for women and people of trans experience. Y'all know if it's about us, it must include us. So if you're new here, I welcome you. If you're not, well, I welcome you back still. Next slide. And so I think our vision is really important because where we're going is always important, that we envision a world where women and folks of trans experience can live long, healthy, dignified lives free of stigma and discrimination. So we're about everything that helps get us to that point. And so the ways that we do that, just like we're doing today, is we develop and support leaders. We organize on issues and elections, which I see some folks on here who've been throwing down. We change the culture of our space and the broader environment, and we change policies. We change those policies that impact our lives, and then we work to heal our communities, and we know what that means because we know how we have to show up in a lot of spaces, and that means all of it with a racial, gender, and economic justice lens. So our theory of change is about liberation, transforming systems, and building power, which is what we're doing today. Barb?
Great, thanks, Vanita. So PWN is where we do the work in our communities. And so as we're moving through spaces, what we realized is that many of us have been asked to step into leadership roles, elevated to leadership roles, or maybe wanting to be in leadership roles, running meetings, and perhaps have not had some training about what goes into a good meeting, how do you plan it, and how do we make sure that meetings that we're a part of are inclusive, are effective, and really involve everyone. So why holding a good meeting is important is because we want to mobilize people living with HIV and our allies, women living with HIV, our transgender folks. We want to make sure that if they are at the table, that at any table, at a table that we're running, but also at tables and meetings that we're participating in, that we feel like our voice is heard, that we're respected, and that we know how to move through that space so that we can represent. I don't know about you, but I have had a couple of meetings where I've been in where I have felt like I was just a box checked, like, okay, check, we've got one woman living with HIV, great. And that people didn't really want to hear from me and that I wasn't meaningfully involved. And that was a group that I never went back to. And so we want to make sure that as we are organizing in our spaces, that people feel included. So good meetings, and good meetings can be subjective. It could be, you know, a meeting where everybody gets their feelings out, but if at the end people feel heard, and that is what you wanted to accomplish, that it was a brainstorming session or a way to kind of talk through some hard feelings, that people felt like they were engaged, that they were heard. We want to make sure that there is shared leadership, and most importantly, we want to make sure that we're developing new leaders. As the HIV movement has gone on now for 40 years, we oftentimes know that we want to step back, we want to retire, or we want to move to something else. And we need to make sure that the leaders who are stepping in to fill our roles, the leaders of people living with HIV, are trained up and ready to step in. We want to make sure that people's time feels like it is valued and that participation is encouraged. And most importantly, as we are recruiting, as we are getting people to join our coalitions, we want to ensure that they feel that their participation has been meaningful and that they will come back and that they will recommend other people to come back instead of feeling like their time is not valued.
Yeah, I want to say something there. So you might go to other meetings that their goal doesn't seem to be developing new leaders. They're moving on whether you get it or not. But what we're trying to say is wherever table you sit at, that can be a goal of yours to not only participate, but you see this as it's a way to build new leaders. It's a way to, you know, get our participation supported. It may not be the goal of the folks holding the meeting, but we show up with that goal.
Yeah, thanks, Vanita. You know, that's the part that as we move in coalition spaces, we absolutely want to make sure that we're building on the voices of people living with HIV. And it might be that at planning councils or other groups that they don't particularly want a whole bunch of us there, but we need a whole bunch of us there to make sure that diverse perspectives are shared. So absolutely, thank you. So a recipe for a good meeting, and we're going to go pretty basic here, and apologies to if people are really savvy around meetings, but we wanted to make sure that people had a chance to really think about what goes into a good meeting. So good meetings have strong leadership. It doesn't mean that you are bossy. It means that you are able to facilitate people to participate. And it also means that you respect the agenda and that you ensure that people are heard. Again, the leader has a strong and clear understanding that strong leadership doesn't mean that you get to speak all the time. A strong facilitator of a meeting often speaks less than other people, but you hold that space and you make sure that the agenda is followed and that people have a chance to speak, that everyone has an opportunity to participate, and that really the process moves smoothly instead of it being where people are picked out and favorites are given more time to talk, or people talk more than really the space is allowing. We've been in those meetings where somebody just continues to talk and respond and we don't get to hear from everyone. And again, so much of the wisdom of our community lives in each of us, and we want to make sure that that is something that we bring forward. So agenda setting and sharing the agenda ahead of time is really important when you're talking about a good meeting. We want people to feel prepared, to know what we're going to talk about, to have had a chance to think stuff over or research it if they want to share documents even if they find something that is really useful. So agenda setting and sharing agendas ahead of time, very, very important for a good meeting. Time management. You know, again, we have all been in those meetings where you get through just the first thing on the agenda and everybody's like, oh, can everybody stay for another hour? And it's like, that's not what I had planned. So we want to make sure that we really respect time, think of the agenda. And that's not to say that if that first item on the agenda needs that full hour, that you can't do that, but that it is a group discussion and that it's not just something that just kind of happens. So we're thinking about collaborative group leadership as part of that agenda building. We want to pay attention to group dynamics and conflict resolution. We are often in spaces where people living with HIV can feel disempowered. We have been in these places where state health department is running a meeting or an organization that we receive services from. Or when we are in meetings that we are running, we have, you know, sort of some people who might monopolize the time. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to group dynamics, that we are paying attention to power and privilege, that we are ensuring that communities of color, in particular Black folks who are at the table, people living with HIV, transgender folks, non-binary folks, are given more time rather than less. And this is something we have to intentionally think about as we are showing up in these meetings. When it comes to decision making, it is really important in a meeting to understand how you're going to make a decision. Is it simple majority? You take a vote and whoever has the majority wins. Is it a modified consensus model? Is it consensus, which is that we're going to just stay here and keep thinking about it until everybody agrees? It is important to know that ahead of time. It is also important to know who's voting. It's always very interesting when you're in a group that has a voting membership and they come and vote on something and everybody in the audience raises their hands, and it's like, that was not very clearly laid out. So you want to make sure that people know how they can participate, who's voting, and how decisions are made ahead of time, so that we're not kind of perpetuating this power dynamic. There are lots of ways that meetings and the way meetings are run support white supremacy. Robert's Rules of Order, I'm just going to say it right now, is patriarchy and white supremacy personified. Yeah, Robert's Rules of Order really, really stink. And it is about, if you know the rules and can play within the rules that are set up, then you can run a meeting and get your voice heard. And if you're new or maybe not so familiar with them, you are silenced, and that is not the way we want to make sure that our meetings run. So knowing how that happens, if it's consensus rule, then how is that going to work? If it is Robert's Rules of Order, how can we maybe move to something a little bit different than that? Because every time we go by, these are the rules and these are the ones we follow, that is shutting down voices, and that is something we really are trying to move beyond, that we just demand that we move beyond, not even try. We're moving beyond it because it is not serving us in our communities. You know, we always want to talk about respecting each other's opinions. You can disagree with someone, but especially if it's starting to get personal, that is time to call for a break, perhaps, because we want to be able to speak our truth, to share what's important to us, but also not to tear each other down. And then when we're having group dialogue, it's important for us not to actually get caught up in interrupting. You know, it slows the process down, and it also doesn't respect other people who might want to add something. And oftentimes what we find is that the people with the loudest voice, who have the most institutional power, are the ones who interrupt the most. And so set up a group agreement around interruptions. Like, you get to speak your piece, and everyone gets to speak their piece before we go back around and people get to comment or provide feedback. That is a way to be really collaborative. And those are the kinds of things we really want to start thinking about building into our meetings that we run. And also, as we step into leadership meetings that we are participating in as well, we can demand that meeting rules change at planning councils and at other committee work if it feels like it is suppressing the voices of the people who most need to be heard. And then finally, you know, when we come to meetings, it is easy to get all in our brain and be just very detailed, but we also want to make sure that we're bringing our heart connection. If something seems really problematic and you're not quite sure, you should say that, because oftentimes if it feels wrong and you can't identify it in that moment, it's important to elevate that, because it might be something that somebody else is feeling, or it might be something you can come back to and elaborate why it feels like it's impossible or difficult. Anita, I'll stop there, and before I go to the next slide.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about some of these, like Robert's Rules of Order, these group dynamics. A lot of what you might be seeing are being run by other folks, and so I know what I've been on Ryan White Planning Council. They use Robert Rules of Order. I'm not. You know, I tend to yell out when I have something to say or whatever, so it takes a while, and I was getting shut down and didn't really understand it, even though I have the book. They weren't ready to give up, and some of these things we may not change overnight, but we can begin saying, hey, we didn't see this. Hey, what I was taught is this, to see if folks will shift. One of the ways we shifted in our planning council, they at least made some little small cards to put a little summary of some of the key rules, because most of us didn't know it. Now, is that my end goal? No, but it was still moving the needle to say, you guys are operating under rules that most of us don't understand. So that's hard to get involved. So recognizing that sometimes these meetings are being run by someone else doesn't mean we can't begin to give input around the way we like to see it run, and be able to shift the way that folks do things.
Great, thanks, Vanita.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah. So then when we want to talk about how to hold an inclusive meeting, we mentioned this a little bit around power dynamics, and especially making sure that the voices of the communities that most need to be heard are elevated. It is helpful once you have a meeting to go ahead and stop and think about it. So after the meeting is done, and you're kind of debriefing with other fellow leaders, or maybe somebody else who attended, here are some things you can think about: is who was missing? So who was not there at all? And how do we make sure that they're invited?
Yeah.
Who was not heard from, right? Yeah, we have some really wise people who come to meetings and don't know where or how they should say something, and so they're silenced. And that is a loss. It's a loss of their wisdom, it's a loss of their participation. And so we need to think about who wasn't heard from, who spoke a lot. There have been meetings where we were like, okay, that person talked a whole lot, and oftentimes was pretty confrontational or obstructionist, because we were talking about something that they felt really challenged by. And so do we need to talk to them about possibly stepping back, or giving someone else an opportunity? We talk about leaning in and leaning out, and taking space and making space, and that is really important to think about. And it's a good reflection to kind of have as a debrief after these meetings. We talk about cultural differences being ignored or being supported. Whenever we say we have always used Robert's Rules of Order to run our meetings, what is so terrible to think about possibly running a meeting some other way? We have always had, I am sure, and I want to encourage everybody, if you've got examples of what we're talking about that you want to bring up, pop them in the chat box, because we would love to have this be really interactive and to hear from people. So what I can say is that I have been a part of a planning group in Colorado, and I'm going to go to you next, Benita, to see if you have an example of where we've always done it this way. Yeah, you got it. Okay, Benita's got her example. So here's my example, is that I'm a part of a planning group in Colorado, and we always have our meetings at the health department, where to sign in, you need to show ID and sign something to say that you're there. Now, for me, that is a big barrier, because we have folks whose gender does not match their ID, or who perhaps they're undocumented and don't feel comfortable, or who just don't want to be a part of the health department's records. And so when we talked about meeting in other places, that was a real pushback. We've always had our meetings here. It's convenient. And it's like, it's convenient for you, but it's not convenient that you need to hear about. So when we talk about all of this, like, these are real ways that we can move within these systems to change it. So Benita, I'd love to hear about your example of we've always done it this way.
Well, I wasn't even going there, and I know other people are saying that some of my issues about holding an inclusive meeting is the time of day. As soon at a noon meeting, assuming everybody works, it's in a government building. It it requires however many buses, parking. It's just, you could get there, and the time for people to talk is 10 minutes. If you miss that window, you miss the opportunity to say something. So I think other kinds of barriers or rules like that, you can't call in and make a comment, or with COVID, we got to do a lot by Zoom. But I think inclusive meetings also go with the time of day, where that meeting is held, and the things you talked about is how do people access those meetings? They think they're accessible. I don't think those are accessible meetings. So, but we've always heard this, we've always done it that way. That's, picking the same people. MIPA, meaningful involvement, is not race and gender neutral. So if the same people are doing the same talking, that's also a problem. Even if they didn't talk a lot, then if they becomes the go-to people, MIPA is not race and gender neutral, y'all. So if it doesn't reflect the epidemic, or it may reflect your area, we need to, that's our opportunity to say something.
Thanks, Benita. All right, so one of the things that's really helpful as we're thinking about holding meetings is, Olga, did you have something you wanted to add? It looks like you're off of mute.
Oh, yeah. I 100% Benita, because that's one of my biggest issues, because I don't belong to an agency or a work actually work in an organization or anything for when I'm on planning boards and all that. And that is one of the biggest barriers, they don't give out the information when the meetings are, certain emails, then yeah, it's only on their lunch breaks, and sometimes they change their lunch break hours without notifying a lot of people. You know, they try to trick people that don't actually work in the places so they can't show up,
Yeah,
especially, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Thanks, Olga. So one of the things that you can do that actually is really helpful when you're trying to come up with a way a meeting is run, way people are involved, way people feel heard, is to talk about group agreements. Even in business meetings, and actually in a number of planning councils and other community groups, they're now starting to have group agreements that talk about how people are heard, how people are invited, how people are seen. And so you could recommend, if you have a planning council or another group or a PWN group, to say, can we take 15 minutes at one meeting to come up with some group agreements that will become our standing group agreements, that we will read through, that will talk about how we're going to treat each other, how we want to be heard, how we want to be seen. You know, a lot of times people are like, well, that's not really corporate, but that's not the way we do our advocacy work. We do our advocacy work from our hearts, and we do our advocacy work from our need from our community. And so by being able to know how this is going to be played out and how the agreements are going to be kind of defined, it can be very, very powerful. And so here's a, you can do drawn group agreements, but it is important that they are formed by the group, that they are referred to if conflict arises, because they help set the tone. And so a couple of ones, these are just a couple, but we can continue on and say, you know, we want to listen to understand, let go in order to grow, take space and make space. The one diva, one mic is always a powerful one, so you don't have a lot of crosstalk. Managing technology so that you're really present. These are all very powerful things, and really helpful as people go ahead and think about how they want to be in space, because as we get involved, our time is more and more committed. And so we want to make sure that we are showing up in ways where we feel empowered and supported. You know, and then there's always the one around confidentiality, you know, take the wisdom from the room. I love this, and we'll share slides, and there's a list of group agreements actually in the notes of the slides. But one is take the wisdom from the room, but leave the details. And that is always pretty powerful for me. Anita, anything you want to add about group agreements?
No, nope, I think you said it all.
All right. So now we're getting to, so you want to have a meeting. What are a couple of things to think about ahead of time? And when we're talking about ahead of time, we are not talking an hour ahead of time. We are talking a couple of weeks ahead of time. Because again, and we've said it a couple of times, and I just want to keep reiterating it, by allowing people to know that meetings are happening ahead of time. So Olga, you spoke to this as well, around knowing when meetings are happening, knowing what's going to be discussed, knowing what topics are going to be there, who's going to be presenting. It means that we can show up and be prepared. If necessary, as a group of people living with HIV, we can have a meeting ahead of the meeting to come up with what we feel our needs are, or what we're going to demand, or if we're going to shut it down. And then have a meeting after the meeting, again, like we talked about a few slides ago, where we break down who was missing, how do we get people there, who wasn't heard, how do we support them. This is how we continue to build and organize our community to make sure that we can show up in ways that feel really empowering. So you want to have a meeting. First question, does it need to be a meeting? There are a lot of meetings that are happening right now. If there's something that you're going to brainstorm about, it should be a meeting. If it is a standard business meeting to make sure that you are following along and getting some things done, it should probably be a meeting. Or if there is a big debate and you want to really be able to talk something out, it should be a meeting. Sometimes it can just be an email, and that can be pretty helpful to sort of give people a little bit of a break. You always want to ask before a meeting, as you're getting ready to start the agenda, why are we meeting? And you'll see Vanita actually has a draft agenda that we'll talk about. We want to have goals. What are we hoping to accomplish? You know, in this meeting, we want to go ahead and get an update about what PWN Texas is doing and celebrate the strike force victories. And we want to go ahead and plan our next session. Those are great goals. So think about, why are we meeting? Who is invited and why? There are some meetings where we just want to have it be people living with HIV, women living with HIV, because we need to come up with what our goals are ourselves so that we figure out what we're going to do moving forward. And then there are some meetings where we want to just throw it open and have everybody feel like they are welcomed in. So it's important as you're planning the meeting to think about who you want to have there, because it is uncomfortable to have people show up for meetings when they are not expected. I'll just, and sometimes that's a powerful maneuver. So all of these can be powerful maneuvers, showing up at a meeting where you're not expected to be at to shut some stuff down. Almost swore there, Vanita, on Zoom. Oh my goodness. Sometimes just shut stuff down, and showing up at meetings where you're unexpected is a powerful move. But when we're planning meetings and we want to be inclusive and we want to make sure people know, it's important to think about who's invited and to sort of communicate that clearly so that people know when they can, where they can be and feel welcomed. Assign someone to handle all of the details. Even on Zoom, there's a lot of details around meetings: the Zoom link, the calendar invite, the sending the emails, the agenda. And then if you're in person, because some people are getting back to meeting in person, it is important to think about the meeting time and the meeting place, and is it accessible? Because again, as we're doing coalition work and as folks leading with HIV, living with HIV, are leading more and more groups, we want to make sure that we're setting the example of that the time is accessible, that the location is accessible, that people don't have to sign in or show IDs or anything else that is a barrier. Because barriers, nah, we don't want to do that. Anita, anything you want to add?
Yeah, too funny about now Zoom. I got invited to do something last Friday and I said, sure. And I sent them an email, where's the Zoom link? They sent me an address. And so it threw me off because I'm like, oh my God, they expect me to show up. But I said yes before I realized it was in person. So now that we've been doing COVID, we got to be clear for meeting people in person. Yeah. I was able to make it, but yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
And for some people, I mean, here's the thing is that if you are not comfortable being in meetings just yet, you can ask to be able to present or be a part of it virtually. And people should still be able to figure out how to do hybrid models, because we absolutely, and sometimes it's not about worrying about COVID. Sometimes it's about, getting to downtown is not so easy, or I don't have really reliable transportation. And so that's part of the lesson that I really, really hope we hold on to from COVID, is that we can do meetings with Zoom. People can present and we can have discussions via Zoom that can be really powerful and really inclusive. So again, let's throw it open and make sure that as many people can participate as possible. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about agendas because we introduced it a little bit. So agendas, and perhaps we're focusing a little bit too much on it, but it is really, really important. Because again, we've all shown up at meetings, or maybe most of us we've all shown up at meetings where there wasn't an agenda, or the agenda was like, we're going to meet and we're going to talk about business and it's going to be great. And I have sworn never to go back to those meetings ever again. And they didn't feel like good use of my time, and it didn't feel respectful. And I certainly wasn't going to bring other folks living with HIV along with me to add their voice, because it felt like that was just disrespectful. So you've decided you want to have a meeting, you've assigned someone all of the details, either the location or the Zoom. Now it's time to come and think about the agenda. And again, it's a week and a half ahead of time, at a week minimum, because again, you want people to show up and feel prepared to talk about what you're talking about. So an agenda should give people a clear idea of the goals and the topics and the decisions. It should have all of the meeting information, so the location or the Zoom link and the time at the top of the agenda, because we all have been scrambling to try and find something, and really want to go ahead and think about how do we make it easy. If I have one sheet of paper or I have one thing on my phone, I can look at it and I can find that. Make sure you send the agenda out to all the participants, not just the leaders, so that you can get feedback about what might be missing from the agenda. Assign a lead for each item. So when we get to the sample agenda, you'll see that there's a time and there's a topic, and then there's somebody who's leading that discussion to make sure that it's just kind of like, oh, wait, I'm talking about this? No, I'm not ready to talk about this, but okay, I'll just talk, and then people just go on for a really long time and it's not specific. Again, we want to come back and we want to have something where people feel like their time is respected, they're intentionally involved, and that they know what is expected. If the meeting is long, or pretty much longer than about 2 hours, you want to make sure you schedule in breaks. It is easy to say, oh, just take bio breaks when you need them. But the problem is that when you do that, then people have to choose when they leave the meeting to step away or to not be involved. So it is much better to say, we're going to have a 3-hour retreat, or we're going to have a 3-hour retreat and we're having a 20-minute break in the middle. Everybody's going to go to the bathroom. We'll have a chance to talk and walk around and say hi if we're in person, or everybody, if we're on Zoom, can go and get a cup of coffee and come back. And then that way nobody has to miss part of the agenda or miss part of the meeting because they have been off taking care of business. If there's not going to be a break, we actually usually even say that, like, we're going to do an 1.5-hour meeting. There won't be a break. If you need to step away, we understand, but we're going to keep it to 90 minutes. And that is going to be the time. That means you need to start on time and stop on time. Again, don't schedule too much in your agenda. Be really conscious about what you managed to do. So when you have your meeting afterwards, stop and think about, like, okay, so what did we think about? What did we do? What do we need to do next time? What can we trim away? And then finally, just make sure that there's time on every agenda for community comments. And that is super important, so that people who are coming, who are visitors, have a chance to say something instead of just being there and are being talked at the whole time. So next up, we've got some practical meeting tips. Start on time. We've already talked about many of these. Start on time. Keep it short and simple. Give people a chance to socialize beforehand. So if the meeting starts at 7, maybe you reserve the room at 6:30 and you have a chance to come together and have dinner ahead of time and to talk and to socialize. That makes people feel like they're not only receiving support, but also really means that when you get to the meeting part of it, the business part of the meeting, that people will have already had a chance to say hello and not get distracted. Stay on topic and within your agenda times. If something needs more conversation, you can go ahead and decide either we need to vote on taking time from other items on our agenda, or maybe we just need to schedule it on our next meeting. But don't just have agenda drift, where it's basically like you say, okay, from 5:10 to 5:20, we're going to be talking about this particular issue, and then it's 5:30 and people are looking at their watches and they're like, okay, so are we going to stop talking about this soon? We're never going to get through. Am I going to be here for the rest of my, evening? The rest of my life is what it feels like sometimes when you're in meetings. So just be really clear and give people a chance to say, we want to finish this discussion now. Let's go ahead and, forget the rest of the items on our agenda, but have it be a collaborative decision is super important. Think about different ways to talk about particular topics. So you can have brainstorming, you can have, list all the pros and cons. It can be many different ways. It doesn't have to be just one person who is bringing up the topic and then everybody else gets to say their point and then you vote. Mix it up, be creative, think about different ways. want to make sure that you always, always, always follow up with a meeting summary or minutes that go to everyone who was there, visitors included, and then also goes to people who weren't able to attend, so everybody knows what happened. And in your minutes, you're going to have next steps, and next steps are the very, very specifics. So we will say, okay, so Olga has said that she is going to check on our meeting room for the next meeting. And we have Deirdre, and Deirdre is going to go ahead and write a letter to, House Representative about this particular issue. And, I'm just calling out who I can see on the video, but, say who's going to do what and have it written down so that there is no misunderstanding. And that way also you continue to move your business forward with really specific steps. And then finally, end on time. That is so important because it ensures that people feel like their time is respected and that they know, okay, so when we say we're going to end at 7:30, I will be able to leave at 7:35 after I've said goodbye to everybody without it feeling like, well, I might leave, I might not leave, perhaps not. It is important that that becomes something that you are just reliably known, that meetings end on time. So that is our practical meeting tips. Looks like somebody's asked if these slides will be sent to folks. Yes, we are more than happy to share our slides because we want to have good, healthy, wonderful meetings for everyone.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, if you're going to have a socializing time, put it on the agenda. There's some of us who are more social than others. And so if I know there's networking time or something like that, I can choose to come early and do it or come at the start of the meeting or at the end. So that will be my only add there.
Ooh, that's a great point, Vanita. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a good socializer, so I want to know and I can choose.
Yeah, got it. That's a great point. Thank you. All right. So that is about planning meetings and running meetings and agenda planning. And here's just a few other things that we want to go ahead and share with people. The U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus did a remarkable community conversation led by Vanessa Johnson that was talking about trauma-informed community love. It is really important for us to acknowledge that as people living with HIV and being in spaces that sometimes do not feel like they are welcoming for us, that some of our own internal trauma can be triggered. We can show up in certain ways that diminish our voice. I would recommend, and it's in the links here, and it also is on the caucus's Facebook page, that if you weren't able to listen to this conversation, that you go back and do it. It's 90 minutes, and it is really powerful. It was Vanessa and Tammy Kenny and Araya Lester and Lorenzo Lewis talked about how we, as people in this community, love on each other and support each other so that when we stand up in our strongest, healthiest way possible, and that we support each other when we're not that way. And knowing that indeed trauma is a part of how many of us show up, and that we acknowledge that we can be community caretakers for other people living with HIV. And that does not mean that we're saying, oh, you're messy, girl, sit down. It means that we go up and check in on somebody who perhaps felt really challenged in a meeting, or if someone was really quiet, that we make sure that they're okay during the break. And if they're feeling really misunderstood or targeted, that we go and sit by them and perhaps ally with them to help them feel more powerful. This is how we, as people living with HIV, can best do our work, is together and in supporting and empowering each other. So little plug there, and again, that's on the HIV Caucus's Facebook page, but the link is also in the slides that we'll share with everybody. All right, now we're going to just quickly talk about decision making, because that was one of the things that we did talk about. So there are many different models around decision making. So there is the consensus model, which is that everybody agrees 100%. There is the consensus model -1, which is that indeed, if one person says not kind of feeling this, that it can still move forward. There is modified consensus, And that is where people can basically do, it's also called fist to five. And that can be everything from, you know, I hold up my fist like we have to stop this. This is problematic and I do not agree, to 5 fingers up like, yeah, I'm all on board. And people can vote where they're at. And so if it's kind of a 3 or above, it means that you're in agreement. If it's a 2 or 1 or a fist, then it means that you need to stop and have that conversation a little bit more. There is the leadership decision, which is where an executive or an expert makes the decision for you. As you can see, we've gone from really collaborative at the top of the list to certainly hierarchical, patriarchal, and I would say, you know, certainly leading into white supremacy culture as we go down the list. So we've got leadership making the decision, which is often an executive. We have the majority, which is 50% plus 1. Then we have unanimous, which is everybody must agree, which tends to really lead to some hard conversations where people often feel like they have been pressured to agree to something or bullied or have to agree, otherwise you're going to be in that room for the rest of your life. All of these have been helpful, and so there are a number of really good ways to make consensus. You know, PWN, we say we make our decisions by a modified consensus, which means that we really do talk out a lot of our decisions, identify when we're ready to not move forward. And then sometimes when there needs to be a decision that is made, we agree that we will, you know, do a vote and see where we're at. And if it needs to be a vote, then we hope that everybody votes what they feel is important and that there is a majority. That doesn't happen often. It's most of the time really that we talk and come to consensus. Vanita, do you want to say anything more about decision making?
No, I was looking at Bonnie's question, the difference between consensus and unanimous. You want to answer that?
Yeah. So, so consensus is where you talk about it, and the most important part around consensus is that if there are adjustments that need to be made. So when you're talking about it, you're not just talking about the program, but you're talking about what your solution is. And so it could be, we're going to make this decision, but we're going to review it after a month, or we're not going to make this decision 100%, but we're going to do a pilot program. So consensus includes modifications to the program and how it's being implemented so that people can agree and that addresses people's concerns. And it's important that when you're talking about consensus that you also really talk about that people are not blocking because of a personal objection, but instead are saying that I feel that this is not good for the organization or for our moving forward. And then unanimous is everybody votes and everybody has been convinced to say that they support it, because if not, we're not going to be able to get anything done. And that tends to be more of a like vote for this and it's a yes or no vote and that's it. So consensus is much more collaborative and can take longer, absolutely, but comes up with some really unique and vibrant decisions that are powerful and meeting the needs. So let's see, next up. Yeah, so with modified consensus, there's a few more bullet points or a few more things to talk about with that. You know, modified consensus is a good way to come to compromise. It is a good way to hear what everyone is thinking about or what the challenges are or where people might be feeling just a little pinchy. And again, it is a great way to come to especially conversations and decisions that impact a broad group of people. And especially when it is impacting people's lives, it is a good way to reach decision. And with that, I think, Vanita, is this you or do I have one more slide?
This is you, and then I go.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize, everybody. I feel like I've talked an awful lot today, but hopefully this is really helpful. And so secret to group decision making is, again, it starts with a great group. You know, as you're building your groups and as you're getting ready to have meetings, and especially as you're talking about your PWN groups or groups that are coalitions of people living with HIV. Think about your group agreements. Make sure that people's voices heard at least once. If somebody's been really quiet, ask them if they would like to say something. Sometimes people are figuring out where they're at in the space, or sometimes people are feeling really challenged and they need an invitation to be able to share. Measure interest. So just because one person feels really strongly about something doesn't mean it has to be the entire group. It can be that there's a subgroup that talks about it. And then finally, once decisions are made, it is really important that we then don't go behind. So when the group comes to an agreement, however you decide that you're going to do it, it is important that group agreement is supported. It doesn't mean that you have to all say gung ho, I'm 100% for it, but certainly not that you're criticizing it behind people's back. If you need to put it back on the agenda and reopen it up, do that. But again, we want to bring our best selves, our best communicating selves to these meetings so that we can be as powerful as we need to be. And then last but not least, because we did talk about being in meetings where you might not be running the meeting, there are a couple of tricks that you can figure out ahead of time that can help support you. So if you're in a meeting that you're not running, it is important to understand the foundation for it. Ask ahead of time if there are bylaws or a charter. Look at a group roster to see who's going to be there. Again, it's kind of like homework, but it does mean that you can show up and can understand. And if there are a group of people living with HIV, this is a great thing to get together ahead of time and talk about so that people understand it. It is important to know who's a voting member and to think about how community participates. And finally, if you're in a group that feels really, really difficult and challenging, you can go ahead and you can call someone at PWN or your PWN chapter and talk to them about it and just get an idea and say, this felt really weird, what do you think? So we call that the phone a friend to get their feedback. All right, now I know it's going over to Vanita.
Yes. So thank you, Barb. And I was even thinking about that last slide is sometimes we strategize before those meetings that we don't run when we need to have a collective voice or power in that meeting and talk about the way we want to show up. So that can be a whole nother conversation around organizing and what we do to come into a meeting and get our voices heard. So, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how to hold a PWN chapter meeting, or how to hold our version of leadership meetings at PWN. Some of what we've talked about are meetings that you might be running or places you may go. So they're kind of these broad concepts too. And even the ones that we use in holding a PWN chapter meeting can be used anywhere else. But I want to speak to chairs or folks on this call. So if you're a person who's a chair or has been a chair and has led a meeting, drop something in the chat and let me know you're here, because this is for those of you who have been chairs, those of you who might be now or leading a meeting for PWN or might be in the future. But some of the things we want you to know is the PWN chapter meetings are a form of business meeting. You can choose to have some social time if you want, but they're leadership meetings. They're a type of business meetings. And a lot of times, I've worked with members around how to hold a meeting, how to do an agenda for a chapter meeting. And these are some of the tips I've given folks over time, or folks have helped me with, is when creating an agenda, for example, you use the minutes from the last meeting in order to draft this agenda. That place that Barb talked about where it had next steps, that tells you the things, that you are going to be taking over to the next meeting. And so to be able to look at where you left off, thank you. I see you, Elder. I see you, Tammy. To know what the next steps were kind of informs you of what the business is that you're going to be doing on that next meeting when you get ready to prepare that agenda, in addition to any new things that weren't part of next steps. So using the minutes from the last meeting is really, really good practice in order to do an agenda. If you're leading a meeting, typically our chapter meetings are held once a month. Some may be twice a month, some may be one every other month. But to send an agenda at least a week before for feedback, we practice MEPA, meaningful involvement. So Agendas are a form of outreach. So it could be reminding people to, I see you, Lisa. It could be reminding people about the meeting when they see that agenda, or it could be they look at it and say, oh my God, we're going to be talking about that. I need to be there, or I need to make sure we're talking about something else. So sending that agenda out, even if it's not a week, if it's 5 days, these aren't hard and fast rules because we're people and we have lives. But sending it out first early is a form of outreach, and it is a practice of MIPA as well. Keeping your documents in the same place that folks in the chapter can access is really important so that people can go back and look at it. Because one of the things of MIPA are in our chapters is we're all in this together. So everything should be accessible. So if you created a document for a chapter meeting, or if you're a state lead, the fact that others can get it is important, so that these aren't secret files. These are files for our whole community, right? One of the things I'd say too is when you're emailing things out and you're emailing an agenda, one of the tricks, and I see it with Ryan Wright, that we're trying to avoid is we want to share a Google document a lot of times, but a lot of times people are reading stuff on their phone. To the degree that you can, copy and paste that agenda in the body of the email. These are just a trick so that folks can just, if they're using their phone, they may not know how to do a Google document, or they may not, have a computer to look at an attachment. So the degree to which you can put things in the body of an email really helps people to be able to just click on it, open it, and see it. We want to make this accessible to folks. So I understand we might have to put an attachment with an email, with an agenda, but the agenda itself, if you could copy and paste it, put it in there, and then you can also attach it, but put it in the body of an email. Ask for help. We have an organizing department here at PWN. You've got some folks in your community. I see folks, Tammy, I see Elder Antoinetta, I see Lisa, Tammy, that other folks have are out in the community that have done this. Ask for help, because nobody just wakes up one day and says, oh, I know how to create an agenda and I know how to do MIPA, meaningful involvement in any of this. It just doesn't happen. We learn this stuff. And also Barb alluded to this, pay attention to power dynamics. Sometimes we can wield that agenda either with a soft touch or with a hard touch, right? I'm doing the agenda, it comes out, come help you in Indianapolis, it comes out, this is it. Or use it as an outreach tool, a teaching tool, a way to demonstrate MIPA. When we're running a meeting, we're facilitating, we're a trusted servant in that role. It is not our meeting. That meeting belongs to the community. So pay attention to how we are running and how we are wielding that perceived power of being a chair, being a state lead, being a leader in that role. We are there to serve, right? And so treating others with respect, I just don't even think I have to go over that, because it's just, we are in positions of leadership. That is what we do. And then if you're holding a chapter meeting or a leadership meeting, welcome new members. Stop for a moment. Don't ignore the obvious, right? To pull people in and recognize that you may be doing business as usual, but that new person is sitting there not understanding anything, right? So that we might need to slow down a little bit to say, wait, we just used an initial that they don't understand, or something, to make sure that folks get a little bit of what we're saying at that meeting. And you might need to schedule separate new member orientations so you can orient people. We have a PWN 101 that I think Barb did recently. We've got, I've done that with folks here in Texas, where we've done a new member orientation, where we've had a separate meeting and we went through what PWN, what we do. And we even got on the internet and took people through the website to acclimate them, because it's a lot of information to gather. So to try to do it only once a month in a meeting for a new person is overwhelming, and it could discourage someone from coming back. Next slide, please. And so we live this meaningful involvement in the way that we hold meetings. We say we're about MIPA and we want others to be about meaningful involvement. We must model what we want. So Barb already talked about getting people in and out on a timely basis. We do that to the degree possible. I'm not asking folks to hold a corporation board meeting or anything, but to the degree possible, we want to do that. Most of you, if you're in a chapter or state lead, you have a listserv, a Google group. Utilize that to talk to people. If you're in a chapter, don't wait till just you sending out the agenda to talk to people. The more people see activity on that listserv, the more you will have people engaged when you want them to come to a meeting. So using that chapter listserv to reach out and touch people at other times, as well as for, sharing the agenda or minutes or key action steps we did, or the outcome of something we were planning, is really important. And we talked a little bit about the role of the chair or the leader in a meeting is to guide the discussion and being aware of the power dynamics. It is not the role of the chair to be this iron fist and running the meeting with an iron hand. You may have times on your agenda, and I think Barb talked about this, and where you might say, oh, we only allotted 10 minutes for that, but you stop and check in with the group to see if they want to do more, if they want to talk about this more and they're agreeing that they can forego something else. So remember, a well-run meeting is good for recruitment and retention. Because mind you, people are sitting there. We are attracted to things that are, we want to be around things that are attractive to us or welcoming and that we can understand and feel a part of. So the way that you run that meeting is recruitment and retention in and of itself. That agenda, everything connected with it will give people the feeling of whether they want to come back. Was it, done? You don't have to be perfect, but what was the spirit in which that meeting was run in, or that meeting was held? So folks are always talking about recruitment and retention, and I'm telling you that agenda, the process for developing it, and the way that that meeting is run will determine whether someone comes back or not. I've seen it. So, and then I want to remind folks that, at chapter level and other things, and we've talked about Ryan White, we're not always in meetings where it's just people living with HIV. A lot of times we're in meetings and they're allies, and that's a different dynamic, right? So our meetings, we can choose to have members only, and have our chapter meetings, or we can choose to have chapter and allies when we want to involve other people. So folks have that choice. My one caveat I say is make sure that you choose when you want to do that, if it's regular or not, but also you need a strong structure. You all need to be tight, because when you invite allies in, they can take over if you are not clear about MIPA and your own structure and the way that you run that meeting. It is really, really important. So, and then be open to feedback. We can always learn. We had a meeting here where in Houston where tensions got really high, and the newest person in the room was sitting there looking like deciding whether she wanted to come back or not. When taking her home, she said, have you guys thought about community agreements? Well, we didn't have any. And this brand new person who came there and saw the little tensions flying suggested that there are now community agreements in that meeting, and that person is coming back. But they had only been there a couple times, but made that suggestion. So be open to the feedback. And then lastly, I'll say, for those of you that are leading meetings, running meetings are a form of training for new members. And this could be in a PWN meeting, or it could be anywhere else. When I go into a room and see how folks are doing something, I'm either taking a lesson of what I want to emulate or what I want to avoid. And so just be mindful that wherever you are at, there's probably somebody watching you too, to see that how you folks function in a meeting. And if there's a person living with HIV, we want to show them the ways that, really encourage their involvement, show them that there's support. And if it's in our own meetings, remember that you're the leader, that role isn't permanent, right? We're about building other leaders. So the way that you're running it and doing the agenda is training for those other people who are coming to that meeting or watching that email. So we're always training folks, which is the goal here, is always building new leaders. So I think that was it for me. And I think I'm a little over. Just want to show this now. So chapter meetings, chapter agendas can look very different, but this is just a sample of one we've used, and we copied the great Wahida in some respects and holding some of our meetings, whether it's a leadership meeting. So let's be clear, it's not a support group. We're supportive, but it is not a support group. It's a leadership, it's a business meeting of type. And then where you might, have your group at the top. You might have a moment of silence. I went on and got Asha's book for us to have, some meditation, but folks do something different if they do anything at all. If someone is assigned that, the mission and vision is read every meeting, and it could be someone assigned a different person. We also do values, the values of PWN. We talk about, you do a roll call, and mind you, you might do that first or last. We have a section in the agenda where folks can give any updates from national, if you want, from the national membership call. Maybe we were on a spokesperson call. Maybe you heard something that the rest of the members, you want them to know. So you could have this. Remember, this is only suggestion. Then we would go into business. We used to have old and new, and it was really confusing. So now folks are just doing a business, and it's the action steps from the previous meeting, and then any new things that people might have said they want to talk about. And so a person would do that. One of the things that we've tried to do is do an educational presentation at a meeting. That doesn't happen every time. It could be 10 or 15 minutes, not only to get someone to share their knowledge about whatever they may be comfortable about, or have some expertise or learning about, or it could be something we're trying to do and we want to learn about. Again, that's an optional idea. You choose, you might talk about your voting, you might talk about your, what other planning that the chapter is doing. And then we typically do announcements, and then anyone can make an announcement. And then we next would have, and I don't see this right now, but in those next steps, any action steps that came out of the business discussion, and then we adjourn. And at the bottom, we just have what's the next meeting date and time. Just a sample. You all do what, but this is one way that a meeting can't, a chapter meeting or any business meeting could be organized around, welcoming people in and then bringing people out. I think that's enough.
Sorry, Vanita. It looks like the next steps and the next meeting information that we made sure we put in, because it's so important to have, got cut off. This one formatted really strangely. So
not a worry, but this is outreach. So reminding people again, when's that next meeting before they get that agenda, if they have some next steps. And after the meeting, I would send out a reminder and say, this was the action steps from this last meeting, just as a reminder. And it has the name of the person who's agreed to do them, and boom, you're done. You could share minutes when you get them, but you, again, use those minutes to create that next agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. So next steps, because we live by our next steps as well. Next steps, hopefully, is that if you are not already a member of PWN or are registered as an ally, that you will go to www.pwn-usa.org, and Tiami will put that in the chat box. That will be talking about how you can sign up and join as a member. We hope that everybody does join as a member or an ally. And if you would like to join a chapter, so if you are in a area that does have a chapter, we can go ahead and get you connected so that you can see the living the agendas in real life. And then finally, I didn't see any questions in the chat box, but we do want to give people a chance to see if there are any questions that you would like to ask. And then it looks like somebody has asked if they can reach out to me one-on-one, and that is fine as well.
I want to say Elder Antoinetta said, and please don't be a bully, stop having, okay, lift them up when you're in pain. Absolutely. We're even if it's not a support group, we are still supportive, and we're not going to sit there and watch someone in pain and do business as usual. So yes, thank you, Elder.
Yeah. Any other questions? If you'd like to come off of mute and ask it, you can do that, or type it into the chat box.
I just want to put a question out. Would people feel more comfortable if I stop the recording before they ask their question?
That would be good, Tiami. Why don't you go ahead and do that?